Oh, Manchester United, just when it looked like you were getting your act together, you go off and do this. Newly appointed sporting director Dan Ashworth fired or leaves under mutual agreement, or call it what you will, after just 5 months, and all of this screams that Sir Jim Ratcliffe cannot get the hell out of the way. We're going to talk about sort of what went wrong and how it all went down and who's to blame next here on Pints and Punditry at the Pitchside Pub. So these situations are really tricky to navigate, especially for somebody like me who's on the outside, but I've been in business enough to understand leadership dynamics, and you can sort of dissect things from the media reports and what's being said. And it seems to me from the outside that Jim Ratcliffe cannot get the hell out of his own way and let the very intelligent people that he's hired to run his club, which is not shocking from a billionaire who likes to have his hands in every pot. So what caused Dan Ashworth to leave in less time, really, than it took to bring him in from Newcastle? This is a terrible situation for Manchester United, regardless of who is to blame, and it just started to look like they were getting their act together. They got a great coach in, they got rid of Erik ten Hag, Ruben Amorim is going to be a good coach somewhere, and if Manchester United can get their act together, it should be at Old Trafford. But this is not a great start to that situation. So we're going to try and break this down based on what we know. But before we do, go ahead and hit that subscribe button for me down below so you can follow the channel. Get down in the comments section, Manchester United fans, other fans, fans of Newcastle and Brighton where Dan Ashworth has worked before. Get in that comment section, let me know your thoughts on this, and if I'm missing any key pieces of the information, let me know. You can also leave some comments on Twitter at PitchsidePub, and check out the website pitchsidepub.com. So here's what we know. They went after Dan Ashworth big. Manchester United went to Newcastle, they wanted him, they paid a ton of money, they bought out his gardening leave, it took a long time, and he has a strong track record. He helped build the England youth program. He's close with Gareth Southgate. He had success at Brighton, and he went to Newcastle and was a part of their build, and they have now taken a step back, but he was a part of the climb that they had once they got to the Premier League, and it was key in bringing in players like Alexander Isak and others. So the track record is there, and I don't think you can really argue that Dan Ashworth is not a good sporting director. But that doesn't mean it was a good fit, and in business, especially sports business, you've got to have a meeting of philosophies. And someone who's very good and someone else who's very good, if they don't meet philosophically, it's not going to work well together. And quite often that formulates as a power struggle. And that appears to be what happened here. And when the owner is involved in that power struggle, it never goes well, because of course he's going to win. If Jim Ratcliffe wants to play a role in anything, whether it's paying a lot of money for Matthias de Ligt, or firing Erik ten Hag, or whatever, he's always going to win that battle. And guys like Dan Ashworth don't want to work for somebody like that because they're used to having the power and authority. And I don't want this to come across like he's some power-hungry tyrant. I mean, maybe he is, I don't know. But it's okay to want to have the authority to do the job you were hired to do. That doesn't make you a bad guy. It doesn't make you narcissistic or power-hungry. If I was hired to be a sporting director for a club, one of the questions I would ask is, what kind of authority do I have here? Do I have the final say on X, Y, and Z? And if the answer is no, I don't know that I want the job, because I'm going to get credit or blame for things I don't necessarily have a say over. And there were some quotes that came out that apparently really upset Jim Ratcliffe, and I guess I understand why, because they probably never should have been said publicly, but by Dan Ashworth and Omar Barada when talking about the decision to retain Erik ten Hag this past summer. They basically said it had nothing to do with them, and that the decision was already made when they got there. And of course, Ratcliffe hated that, because then it falls on him. Well, okay, so let's assume that's true, because if they both came out and said that, knowing that that would be an unpopular thing to put out into the public, I would imagine they would only say that if it was absolutely true. There's certainly no reason to lie about that. And again, it probably shouldn't have been said at all. But obviously Ratcliffe didn't like that, because then it puts the onus on him. Well, then don't make that decision, rich guy. Like, I don't know what we're doing here, but if you don't want the blame, then don't make the decision. You hired Barada, who's a very smart guy and has a good track record from Manchester City, and you hired Ashworth, who has a great track record from a couple of clubs. Let them make the call. Stay out of the way. One of the best things these rich owners can do is hire good people and get the hell out of the way. That's what the best owners do. The worst owners meddle. The worst owners micromanage. The worst owners interject. And if you want to be that owner, that's your prerogative, Jim. You bought the team, but then don't hire these really talented people, because what's going to happen is they're going to leave in 5 months, right? And even with the Erik ten Hag rehiring, he was still given veto power on a lot of personnel decisions, part of why Matthijs de Ligt came in. And so you brought in a guy like Dan Ashworth, whose track record speaks for itself, and then you didn't let him do the job he was hired to do. You didn't give him the say in the managerial decision, and I have to guess that he would have been for getting rid of Erik ten Hag and doing this coaching search in July or August rather than in December, which would have been a better situation. He also would have probably gone after different people, probably players who fit the new coach's profile, because that's the problem they have now with Ruben Amorim, is they have a bunch of expensive players who don't fit the profile of what he wants to do. He runs an entirely different system, especially with the 3 at the back, and you need really strong wingbacks. And so they don't have the players to do what Amorim was hired to do because they didn't let Ashworth do what he was hired to do. Do we see a commonality here, a common theme? And that's why I'm saying this all seems to come back to Jim Ratcliffe, because he seems to want it to all come back to him. That's the common denominator here, is the wealthy owner who's hiring the right people and then not letting them do the things he hired them to do. And that can be extremely frustrating for these talented, successful individuals. So yeah, if I'm Dan Ashworth, after 5 months of that, I'm probably going, all right, you know what? I'm not going to get to do anything I want to do here. I'm out. And if he didn't have a role in the Ruben Amorim hiring, that was probably the final straw. And it is worth noting that when Amorim was hired, we didn't get a statement on Ashworth, and he had been a very public-facing, forward, media-friendly sort of director, and that varies from club to club. At some clubs, you never hear from the sporting director. At other clubs, they're very front and prominent. And Ashworth had been a pretty public figure at Manchester United since his hiring. Then all of a sudden, when Amorim was hired, he wasn't part of the discussion. And there were reports that he wanted someone that had Premier League experience to come in. A Graham Potter or some others, to steal Eddie Howe from Newcastle, who he knew, and that he wanted somebody like that and was not in favor of Amorim. And it does sort of scream that played a role in this as well. But again, why hire him then? Why hire Dan Ashworth if you're not going to listen to him? And I like Amorim, so I'm not going to say that was the right call or the wrong call, but simply from a business strategic sort of fundamental philosophy here, why hire a guy like Dan Ashworth if you're not going to listen to his opinions and you're not going to do what you hired him to do? So this all, for me, comes back to the top, as most things do, but it comes back to Jim Ratcliffe, who doesn't seem to want to take a hands-off approach. And I don't disagree with everything Jim Ratcliffe has done. I did a whole video on the fact that it was time to sort of remove Sir Alex Ferguson from the equation and his actual paid role at the club. And again, Jim Ratcliffe handled it terribly. I said this in the video. He handled it terribly because he said it was a cost-cutting move, and everybody looked around and went, $2 million for that, but we can spend on player X, player Y, player Z. He said the wrong thing, but the move was right. They needed to get out of that shadow. Was it done for egotistical reasons for Jim Ratcliffe? Yeah, maybe, but it was still probably the right move. But it all comes back to Sir Jim Ratcliffe, and it's not coming back to him well. And the common denominator that we are seeing is that he hires good people, and then he doesn't let them do the thing he's hired them to do. I would love to get your thoughts. United fans, other fans, get down in that comment section. Let me know what you think. How are you interpreting this? We're sort of piecing this news together as we get bits and pieces in different reports, which makes it really ugly. But that's my initial takeaway. I may come back to this at a later date if I think, if new information has come out and I think it's changed. But right now, it looks like it's fallen on Jim Ratcliffe. But get down in that comment section. Let me know what your thoughts are. You can also leave comments on Twitter at PitchsidePub. Make sure you hit that subscribe button for me down below so you can follow the channel and check out the website, pitchsidepub.com. Thanks as always for joining us here on Pints and Punditry at the Pitchside Pub.